Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. I thought today we would talk about the Hornet in a little bit more detail in terms of who can get it in War Thunder and then also what variants can come into the game or at least be competitive into the game. One of the issues with the Hornet is it's one of those vehicles which is very capable, but also it very much depends on the weaponry that you give it access to. And this is an area where Gaijin kind of has a little leeway, and why there's some people who believe it'll be dead on arrival if they add it, because of course you already have the F-15E in the American tree and also other vehicles. But also at the same time, if they gave it access to other mechanics, it could still be very useful in the multi-role sense, basically being good at pretty much everything. There's also a bunch of different nations that can get access to the Hornet, and I thought we would go through those too in order to kind of show where this thing can go into the game. But understand, when it comes to vehicles and when it comes to War Thunder, most of the time, vehicles can be added to pretty much any tech tree if they actually wanted to, and that is the crazy thing about it. We have so many examples in War Thunder of vehicles being added to tech trees where they really shouldn't be, but they end up there because, Gaijin wants to put it there and want it to be more balanced. So we'll talk about some of those ideas as well at the same time. So as always, if you enjoy this type of content, make sure to subscribe, and let's get started. So the first section is about the variants of the Hornet, and even though the A-18 is talked about quite a lot, when it comes to War Thunder, there isn't actually a ton of different variants you can add to the game, so it's pretty obvious what's going to turn up. You have, of course, the A to D variants, which are the more standard ones, which are more likely to come to War Thunder. You also have the E and the F. This is the Super Hornet, which will come later. There's no way this will come before the standard Hornet, and then you basically have a bunch of other ones which are designed for more specific roles, e.g. stuff like electronic warfare and also other very specific type of strike missions. So the A, the B, the C, the D are the much more likely ones which are going to turn up, and there are several kind of minor variants between them, but most of them are basically mini upgrades between the A and B to the C and D. So the FA-18 A and B were the first basic versions or production versions of the FA-18. This is a set of vehicles that have access to some pretty cool weapons. You have stuff like the Harm, for example, if Gaijin decides to add it in. Also stuff like Mavericks, things like the Walleye and other ground ordnance, very much a strike aircraft setup. So if they wanted to add these in, they could do, and it would be actually really cool to see. But the problem is, it would mean that it would lack in other capabilities that are already pretty powerful for other vehicles in the game. So it probably wouldn't be top tier. Now, the difference between the A and the B is pretty simple. The A is the single C variant, and the B is the 2C variant. This is something that the Americans do a lot, where they have one C variant and a 2C variant, and the 2C variant is generally used for training. The C and the D are the same. The C is the single C variant, and the D is the 2C variant. Now, it may shock you, but the C variant and the D variant are an upgrade of the A and the B variant. What they incorporate is much more secondary armaments, and then also more capabilities based on their internal electronic systems. They get a better radar. They also have access to the AIM 120, which is of course one of the larger upgrades, and the SLAM, which is quite fun, the AGM-84E. So depending on what Gaijin wants to do in this setup, they could either have a vehicle which is very similar to what we have right now, with maybe access to something like the Harm to give them something new, because we know that when you have a look at kind of ground forces and also aerialistic, they've talked about the idea of adding more modern radars, and in Aerialistic or Air Simulator they have added more realistic large radar stations, so something like a Harm would actually fit into the game now instead of what it was before. The Harm, if you didn't know, is an anti-radiation missile. And this is a type of missile that we don't actually have in the game yet. The Shrike is also another one that people may know. But basically what it does is it homes in on radar signals. And that means that if you have a huge radar station on the ground, then it will just go in and go after it and hammer it. This is something that a lot of people were asking for back in the day when they deemed SPAAs at high tier to be too powerful. And now we have the opposite problem. So imagine if they'd added them then and gone from there. The other problem with these types of missiles, or at least the early ones like the Shrike, the AGM-45, is they're more designed for large radar stations, which had incredibly powerful kind of power outlets to it. So it would be very easy to track since it was a very strong signal. Whereas as the anti-radiation missiles get stronger, therefore they can track targets which are closer. So something like a harm may be useful in ground, might be, but it'll be more useful in terms of something like aerialistic or sim going after those large radar stations that we've seen. So that could be something that they end up doing. And as I said, there are some mini variants between the two sets, but mainly those are the two you're going to get. If I'm going to guess, they'll probably add in the FA-18C. This one gets access to good air capabilities. It gets access to a lot of the electronics upgrades of the series, and also of course, the AIM-120, which is the kind of go-to missile at the highest echelon. But if I'm actually personally adding something like this in, I would add the A in, give it access to something like the HARM, to give it something that people will be interested in, and use it as a way of introducing a new mechanic without being an overpowered crazy vehicle. So that would be how I would do it, but that's not how Gaijin are going to do it, because they never do. So for who could get this vehicle, now this one is a bit more interesting. The Hornet was exported to quite a lot of countries, but not as many as other vehicles in the game. For example, the F-16 was pretty much carted off to everywhere, and its mother. The FA-18 has specific variants that did, come in many different places, and it means that probably 4 or 5 different tech trees could get this, depending on which variants they add, because that is the most interesting part of it. Most nations use C and D FA-18s. They don't use the A and Bs, which would once again go towards the idea that it would make more sense to actually add in the C variant, or at least if they're going to add in the A for America, they could add in the Cs for other nations. And to give you an example, so for America, you have, of course, the A to the D models for the standard Hornet. For somebody like Finland, Finland actually uses the FA-18Cs and also Ds. And as we know, Finland is part of the Swedish tech tree in War Thunder. Therefore, the Swedish tech tree could get access to a Hornet, or maybe even 2 separate types, which would be really cool. Another nation that also uses its own variant of the Hornet is, of course, Canada. Canada uses the CF-18A and also B, so this could go to the British tech tree. And then also you have Switzerland, and as we saw in the leaks a while ago, there are some Swiss vehicles that may be turning up for the Germans in the future. They did get access to the FFA P16, and of course the Swiss also used the FA-18Cs and the FA-18Ds very recently too. So this would be a great addition to the high echelons of the German tech tree, and would mean that it would be quite fun to see. So why not add that in too? So that's already 4 nations without even thinking about weird and wonky ones that they could add. There's also some other nations such as Australia, which used to use them, but now they use the F-35. So Australia could once again go to Britain, or could go to a different country. You have Spain, who uses the A+ and B+ in service. The A+, compared to the standard A, it had a radar upgrade, basically, to bring it up to kind of the C standard. So it's much more like the C than the A, at least in terms of electronics. Then also you have Malaysia, which uses some as well, and Kuwait, which I'm sure you could find some reasons to stick in places, whether it's Japan or whether it's something like Israel, which would be kind of interesting to see too. There are also a bunch of nations which either tested or looked at the A-18. Israel is one of them, and if we use the standard of Japan with the F-16AJ, anything is possible. Or if we use the standard of the JKPZ, which is in the German tech tree, which is the JPZ-KA2, the Argentinian vehicle, which is actually Austrian and French built and has nothing to do with Germany, then technically the F-18 could go anywhere. And that is the kind of crazy thing. And that is the moral, or not the moral, but the conclusion to the story. This vehicle could be put in any tech tree that they want, just like kind of the F-16 was, apart from like the USSR tech tree and I suppose the Chinese tech tree because they had other vehicles. But even in the Chinese tech tree, they ended up adding an F-16A to it, the Block 20 MLU, so maybe even there's possible because of the Taiwan influence. So I know this vehicle is very hyped, and there's a lot of people looking forward to it because it's such a beautiful vehicle, and I'm hoping that people will enjoy it, and I'm sure it'll be spattered all over the place when it comes to War Thunder. Let me know your thoughts and where you would like to see it in the game. As always, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd just like to thank GMG Smiley, CD Beans, Chieftain Mike, EMN3 Galaxy, Tulio Pontecorvo, Brendan Quinn, Carrion Crow, Gus Irenicus, Pyman, Wartinder, Teddy, Daniel Stanton, Martinez, B. Young, Ozzy Panzer, Alan Hacker, Liam Shear, Opium Prime, Lafouche, Sem, Aslan, Uncle Bean, and Derek R. for supporting the channel.